Thanks so much for having me here. And I'm excited to present this research I've been working on with a fantastic team of co authors. Let me call out specifically Camilo Castillo, who's a graduating PhD student from Stanford off to UPenn next year. The work we're talking about is actually getting updated in real time. So if you're interested in learning more, we actually put up a little website that has an app that can allow you to do different types of modeling at acceleratinght.org. So the problem that was highlighted in the morning session on the economics of COVID was that actually we have not just an economic problem and or a health problem, but the two are interrelated. It's not just that suddenly pulling a switch and reopening the economy will make things better, but actually workers and consumers need to have confidence about the health problem. At the same time, the health problem is also an economic problem because we need to make investments at the government level often, but also in the private sector in order to get the health solutions we need to happen as quickly as possible. It's not just a matter of science. The IMF estimates that it's about a $9 trillion hit to the world economy over the 2-year period. That's about 375 billion monthly. What we'll argue here is that advancing an effective vaccine by as little as 6 months could generate gains of over $2 trillion, but you could do it for about $100 billion. And that's basically the world's easiest cost benefit calculation because we're just off by an order of magnitude. The costs are much less than the benefits. And similar arguments apply also to investments in diagnostics and therapeutics. I'm also doing some work in those areas, but today I just want to focus on vaccines. So what are the market failures we have? We see a lot of in the press about how there's a lot of R&D going on in vaccines, and indeed the initial R&D phase seems to be functioning fairly well. But there's another problem which is less well understood by most people, and that is that since most vaccines fail, firms typically don't want to invest in capacity at risk. Instead, they wait till the vaccine is approved. And what's different between vaccines and, say, small molecule drugs is that you can't just take the recipe and put it in a factory and start spitting out vaccines the next day. Instead, vaccine production is actually its own complicated process. There's R&D that goes into scaling up manufacturing capacity. And in fact, each step of of the process and each step of each process in each new manufacturing facility has to develop a test, have that test be approved, and then of course you have to pass the tests for every step. So it's a much more complicated process than you might expect, and it's very difficult to accelerate that process in order and still have safety. So if we follow the usual procedure, we could easily have an approved vaccine, but still have to wait 6 months to get shots in arms at large scale. And that would be a $2 trillion delay. So, first of all, we need to get firms to invest at risk. There's another problem, which is that firms also would like to smooth capacity utilization over time. And in most cases, that's also what the social planner would want. If you can use a smaller factory to produce the same amount of vaccine as a bigger factory, the smaller factory costs less. But on the other hand, in this case, we really want production to be as fast as possible. And so firms are going to have the incentive to build less capacity and produce vaccines slower than society would want. In this case, we want to build factories, use them really quickly, and then have them be empty later. It costs more, but the benefits are worth it. So to help address this problem, we want to think about a solution where we pay firms to invest in lots of capacity at risk before the vaccine is approved. But then we still have questions. How much should we build? How many vaccine candidates? And how should we look at that cost benefit calculation in an environment where we actually have to provide incentives to firms to do the things that we want? So the way we approach that is with a simple economic model where we solve the social planning problem first and then look at an appropriate incentive structure to make that happen. So for the social planning problem, we can start by thinking about what are the benefits of accelerating the production of the vaccine. So to start, at any point in time, we can think about the marginal benefits to vaccinating additional people in a population. Giving initial vaccines to priority groups has the highest bang for the buck. As we move through the population, the later groups have less social benefit than the early groups. So we model that with this sort of diminishing marginal utility. Now in this environment, we can just illustrate graphically what are the benefits from investing in more vaccine candidates. That increases your probability of success. And the higher your probability of success of achieving at least one vaccine candidate that has sufficient scale and time, the higher the benefits. If we build more capacity, we vaccinate people faster, and that shifts the curve over to the left. Now, with that in place, we can think about the comparison with and without the program. So, if we let the status quo go and people wait to start manufacturing at large scale until after they know the vaccine is effective, there's a delay of say 6 months between knowing the vaccine is effective and safe and having vaccine production. And then once you start, you see this curve with diminishing marginal utility. On the other hand, if we accelerate capacity installation, then as soon as the vaccine is shown to be safe and effective, we can start vaccinating people at large scale. But another thing will happen is that as soon as you know that this vaccine actually works, you would want to increase your capacity investment at that point. What you want to do when you know that the vaccine is actually going to work is going to be different. And indeed, at that point, you can start compelling capacity, repurposing, and other types of things, make sure all the supply chain is focused on this one candidate. So you'll start investing in that immediately. And then, say, 6 months later, you get another bump in capacity. And the overall benefit is the area under this curve. Now, if you subtract the social welfare with and without the program, you get this funny looking shape. Then finally, layering on the probability of success, the more candidates you invest in, the higher the probability of success. And so the more you can scale up this curve. Putting that all together, we then want to figure out how many vaccine candidates should we invest in. We did that by taking data from the WHO on the vaccine candidates. We accounted for their stage of development, and we also accounted for correlated risks among the different approaches and platforms that the different candidates were using. We use success probabilities based on the historical record, but also adjusting for the fact that everything's going faster this time. So fast is good, but that means that the risks associated with each step may be higher because we've gone faster and haven't gathered as much data at each step. We've put in also expert opinions in terms of what these probabilities are, but what we've learned is that people have very differing opinions about this. So we've provided this model at the website I mentioned, acceleratinght.org, where you can plug in your own probabilities if you want to see how that changes things. Now, every additional candidate you invest in is going to give you additional success probabilities, but of course, there's diminishing returns. And so this diminishing return plot shows how adding additional candidates to your investment increase your probability of at least one success. We can then put that into the model, and we'll see this diminishing marginal social benefit from each additional candidate. We've assumed here a constant marginal cost, although more realistically, if there's supply chain bottlenecks, there might be some convexity to that. So what we end up with is an optimum of 18 drug candidates to invest in. Then finally, to think about how do we design the incentives. We recommend a combination of pay per outcomes or pull financing and push or cost reimbursement. Pull financing can be used to incentivize speed and performance. But it's expensive because, say, the 18th firm thinks they're not going to be very likely to succeed. And so you have to have a big prize for that firm to find it worthwhile to make a big investment at risk. So you can reduce the cost of the program by also directly reimbursing people's costs. And we recommend push funding of 85% of costs, not 100%, because we do want the firms to have some skin in the game so that we don't see poor quality candidates trying to kind of take advantage of the program. And overall, then we suggest that we should have a big price, like $35 a dose for the first billion doses. That creates kind of a race for speed, and $5 a dose for the next 2.5 billion. And that together with the 85% cost share, we estimate would be enough to get 18 candidates to actually participate in the program. So we also do some work looking at the benefits of international cooperation and the additional gains that can be had if countries actually coordinate some of their investments to get the best portfolio and avoid things like incentives for countries to expropriate or do export controls when they've all cooperated and all have a share of the vaccine pie rather than each going it alone. So that's basically the economic modeling we've done so far. And again, we're happy to get comments on that and discuss it further in the discussion part. Thank you so much.